So thanks everybody for this opportunity to provide this. Let me just make sure I have this. Yeah, this opportunity to give this presentation today in this framework on adaptation to climate change and climate change related activities. As mentioned, I'm CTO of a company ISISPACE. A little bit about ISISPACE, if you haven't heard of us. We are a primarily small satellite mission developer, but we also develop a lot of things related to small satellite missions, either subsystems or services related to launch services, operation services. And we're a vertically integrated company based in Delft since about 2006, so now 16 years ago. We're not really a startup anymore. We're now over 130 people from 30 nationalities, and we have worked on a lot of missions and enabled at least 40 missions and launched over 400 satellites through our launch service. Related to our experience with the Horizon program, and also previously called H2020 FP7, that is actually quite extensive. We, as a company, we see the Horizon program and these programs as a very good way of developing technology and receiving co-funding from these programs to develop successful commercial products. And a few examples are that we've been involved in the QB50 project, where we had the ability to receive co-funding to develop our quad-pack deployer, which is now one of the most used CubeSat deployers in the world. We've also developed electronic power system through the Peace mission, developed a microsat deployment system and a sequencer for instance, the Vega C rocket using a small satellite program, or the small launcher program, I must say. And also currently we're still involved in a number of programs, for instance, developing high accuracy pointing platforms. And we will continue to be interested in taking part in these consortia. So indeed, maybe later on we can discuss future opportunities further in the network part. So the main topic for today I wanted to talk about is the Climate Space NL effort. As we all know, climate change is a huge issue. We don't have to go over that. We're slowly changing, or not slowly, we're rapidly changing our climate, and and time is running out to act on it. And there are a lot of actions, of course, being taken to try to limit climate change, and I think we can all see that that is going a bit too slow. The main questions that we also see is that there's definitely an information problem there. It is very important to start knowing who is emitting what if we want to be successful in reducing emissions. It's also really important to know which emissions we need to reduce first, and what is the low-hanging fruit to try to limit increase in temperature globally. And if these measures are finally being implemented, how can we make sure that we create a level playing field, and that we are really able to measure which efforts are helping reducing emissions, and to indeed make sure that we can keep seeing the effect of these efforts that are being taken. And this is not something that that we're only saying. I mean, a lot of media is also there and saying that that there's a huge issue with information and the data available to keep track of limiting emissions. So there's a post from the Washington Post, for instance, that clearly says that even the climate pledges of countries that were done in, for instance, the Paris Agreement is built on flawed data, and over 25% of the emissions are not even accounted for. And with the systems that are available now, that have been developed also a lot from using Dutch technology and Dutch science behind it, we are actually seeing that there's indeed an issue. Already the Schemaki instrument indicated that methane emissions are much higher than were expected or that are being reported. And also more recently, the TROPOMI instrument flying on Sentinel-5 precursor is measuring major methane leaks. For instance, as we see in the picture here in Australia, methane leaks coming from coal mines that are clearly showing that there's an issue with reported emissions with respect to measured emissions already from these instruments. So we're clearly seeing that there's an issue with providing information, and there's a challenge of providing sufficiently good information to track the global efforts that are being implemented to limit greenhouse gas emissions, to limit climate change. Apart from that, there's a real need for information from a commercial point of view. You can also see it as a huge business opportunity. The provision of information to limit greenhouse gas emissions is a market that is currently strongly growing and also very much in development. And the expectation of the total size of this information market is about 12.5 billion euros in 2035. So that, of course, provides a very interesting upcoming market for also satellite information, satellite-based information. Of course, this 12.5 billion euros is not all going to be addressable by satellite measurements. But if we drill down on what could be the contribution of satellite measurements, this will reach into the hundreds of millions per year that can be addressed by satellite measurements. And this is what we are focusing on with the Climate Space NL opportunity. The other aspect that is quite important is that the positioning of the parties that are currently part of the Climate Space NL consortium are already quite well positioned to provide solutions in this area. So on the one hand, commercial and scientific solutions for information based on satellite data that could be either done in an open way for scientific use, but also in a more proprietary way for commercial means, is already very much in development. So a few examples are shown in this slide, where from left to right, we already see a company, for instance, like Orbital Eye in the Netherlands, that is providing information on oil and gas pipeline infrastructure using radar data. There's already very much development that has gone into making TROPOMI Sentinel-5P data visible and useful through the Copernicus system. There are startups in the Netherlands, such as the company Bright Skies, that also ISISPACE is part of, that are really looking into commercializing the data coming from future emission monitoring satellites. There's huge steps being made in algorithm development to analyze and use satellite data to try to pinpoint emissions. And a few examples are shown here from papers that have been published where we can clearly pinpoint ultra emitters of methane related to oil and gas infrastructure, and also emissions of greenhouse gases coming from landfills. Also, a lot of science is being done on modeling of plumes that are emitted from either coal plants or power stations or other means, and with trying to get a better understanding on how these plumes develop and evolve in the atmosphere. So there's a huge basis on using satellite information and satellite data to create information on greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, on the technology and the scientific side with instrumentation, there's a huge track record within the Netherlands, running back for decades now, developing world-class instruments such as SCIMACI, OMI, and TROPOMI, and now also taking the step of miniaturizing this technology to make these instruments more affordable and also possible to run in large constellations for additional revisit time. So also that heritage is part of this Climate Space NL partnership. And the third part is that the new space business has also been thriving quite a bit in the Netherlands, and ISISPACE has been a part of that with the coming from the CubeSat world. But we're also seeing a nice match with trying to use these new space, CubeSpace satellite systems to now incorporate these world-class miniaturized instruments that are developed in the Netherlands, and combine that into new system opportunities. And examples here are ESA Scout program, where we have proposed the Tango mission. We have looked at, we are already operating high-resolution Earth observation CubeSats that incorporate intelligent attitude control modes to increase the signal to noise that is coming from the relatively small aperture of these instruments, and also other new space aspects, such as making use of low-cost cluster launches, cloud-based mission control, and payload data ground segment solutions, and novel ways of interpreting data on a real-time basis using onboard AI and edge computing that has been in development in the Netherlands also for quite a bit. The idea of Climate Space NL is that it's a public-private partnership that will invest 50 million euros per year in the coming decade, so every year, and tries to really develop and give a boost on this value chain, the total value chain for emission monitoring. So we try to involve parties that on the one hand are part of the problems, or the polluters, the emitters, but also more the upstream technology developers, the instrumentation, data analytics, and the processing pipeline development on making sure this all runs in an automated way. And really, indeed, value-added services to provide tailored solutions for customers and end users that are not only on the commercial side, but also policymakers and scientific end users. So the ambition of Climate Space NL is to become your guide to net zero emissions, and to make sure we can all live in a livable planet and have a sustainable future. I wanted to also show quite a few of these parties that have already been involved in it. You see quite a lot of logos, either from companies or knowledge institutes, and also universities. And if there are any other, on the one hand, Dutch parties that would want to be part of this, then I invite you to reach out and try to see if you can be part of it, and also international partners to see if we can create some interesting partnerships here. What I also wanted to show is a little video. I hope it runs well, that also introduces the concept of the system that we are having in mind. So here you see emissions, and you see global monitoring satellites such as the Sentinels that have a global view. And we plan to complement this with a constellation of small satellites that actually focus and zoom in on emissions. And here you can see a train of 2 satellites that measure an emission in 2 different wavelengths to really provide a modular part of this system. It uses intelligent ADCS modes to use forward motion compensation to increase the signal to noise. And as mentioned, it uses world-class optical instrumentation. It downloads the data to the ground, and indeed can be used by either researchers, policymakers, or industry to either better get a grip on emissions or really try to reduce emissions where possible. So the goals of Climate Space NL are to really pinpoint emissions from space using a constellation of small satellites. We will start with a number of atmospheric species, methane, CO2, and NO2, but this can be extended later on to also look at either sulfur dioxide or aerosols, and also looking into maybe other markets such as air quality and maybe other polluting elements. We would not only want to drive the technology, but we're also really looking at the downstream side. We're really looking at developing services and solutions, and be part of developing this market for information services for measuring emissions. We plan to make a public and a proprietary data stream so that we can serve all these different markets and complement institutional missions. And as mentioned, we would like to foster international cooperation on this. So we're also very interested to see what kind of opportunities you think there are to be part of this endeavor. With that, I'd like to finish my presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Zeger, for that great, insightful presentation. Really good to see how Dutch technology is contributing to, well, solving this global issue, really. We have one question in the chat before, well, maybe open it up for more questions. But Ali from AgriWatch is wondering how we can use the satellite imagery belonging to your CubeSats. In other words, how do you make your data available to, well, to people who would like to use it?
So yeah, as I mentioned, there will be what is foreseen as a public data stream and a proprietary data stream. And the public data stream will be public, so that will be open to everybody. So that will be some kind of data hub or data portal where you can just register for, and then you will receive automatic updates. And then the proprietary part of it will, of course, involve a certain charge. So that will be most likely be some kind of subscription that you can have. And then you can also be part of actually tasking the satellites and deciding where they need to measure.
Okay. Thank you for that. Martijn is asking whether non-Dutch companies or institutes can participate in this particular consortium and be eligible for funding, of course.
Yeah, that is something that we would have to see. At this stage, indeed, non-Dutch companies are not eligible for funding, as the part of the funding stream will come from the Dutch national government. So that is mostly meant for boosting national economy. But there indeed are many different ways that there could be possibilities indeed in cooperation, either through ESA or through the Horizon program, through the European Green Deal. So I think it would be very useful to see if we could look at cooperations in that format, and then I think it will become more interesting, I think, for non-Dutch companies to join this effort.
Okay, thank you. Because we do have quite a few non-Dutch companies in the webinar here, of course. But yeah, that is the topic of this webinar: is how can we create European consortia, in this case, to work on these issues using what you're doing and what Climate Space NL is doing as an example of what we can then replicate, maybe at a bigger scale, hopefully using Dutch technology as part of the solution, but maybe not the entire solution. Let's see, we have another question in the chat here, and I'll just read it out from Salah Edine Bentata, saying, for a given application, for example, oil and gas, what's the required revisit time for a site or facility in order to deliver insightful data and continuous service of monitoring, greenhouse gas monitoring in this instance?
Yeah, we've looked at that quite a bit, and the information that we have is that on average, if it is, it depends very much on what kind of species you're looking at, and if it is really about, for instance, methane leak monitoring, then this is something that is I mean, this is an anomaly. So this is something that happens as a surprise, and there's a certain, of course, range of different times at which such a methane leak exists before somebody, first of all, realizes it and then does something about it. And we've seen that on average, methane leaks exist for about 4 weeks. And one of the things that we're trying to see if we could reduce that from 4 weeks to 2 weeks. And that is something that we believe we can do with this climate space NL system. That we can really make sure that we measure these leaks much faster, so multiple times per week. And once we see a leak, that we very quickly let the polluter or the emitter know, so that they can take action. And the estimation is that we can then cut this leak time from 4 weeks to 2 weeks.
Okay. Now there's another initiative that that I understand maybe. I hate to say in competition in climate change, because climate change solutions are good for all of us. But GHGSat from Canada has a similar solution where they pinpoint emissions that are found by Tropomi, for example.
Yeah.
How do these initiatives work together and together provide a bigger solution than any of them individually?
Yeah, we've done a lot of investigation, of course, in other endeavors, and yeah, there are some interesting things that are different from the way GHGSat is measuring these emissions. And one of the things that we think is in our favor is that we have this huge heritage and backing of Dutch science, so atmospheric science, and also instrument development. And one of the things that we are seeing with GHGSat is that it is taking a long time, has taken a long time before they can really supply reliable data and consistent data that is fully understood. And we believe that that our measurements that are much more based on actually miniaturizing known technology from, for instance, Tropomi, has a much more well understood way of retrieving the emission information from the data, and is a lot less prone to either aberrations in the atmosphere that we do see that GHGSat sometimes suffers from. So indeed, it is a competitive landscape, but we also think that the market is large enough for multiple players. So it's not necessarily that we think there's only one party that is going to be successful in here. And I mean, there are quite a few companies in the space world looking at greenhouse gas monitoring. But we think we have the edge because we have this strong backing of the scientific community. And that's also why we think this public-private partnership is the right way to go, because that also makes sure that the scientific component of this is continued throughout this program.
Okay, brilliant. And then maybe building a bridge to what we're going to talk more about later on. How is ISISPACE, but also Climate Space NL, interested in working with people in this webinar on building consortia in the context of Horizon Europe, for example?
Yes. So as I mentioned, the starting point for Climate Space NL is to look at a mostly Dutch endeavor, but we're very much interested in all parts of this value chain to look at international cooperation. And a few of the examples that are sort of quite obvious that would be interesting is real cooperation on the scientific part, and also on more the later stages of the value chain, so really looking at the end users. This is a global problem, so it is very clear that the market for this information is a global market. So for that, it would be very useful to make sure that we partner and team with international companies that can also become, I don't know, anchor customers for a large amount of the data. And I think also indeed for more institutional programs such as the Horizon Europe program and the European Green Deal, it is very interesting to see if we can make some cooperations with those programs. Okay, very good. And well, I guess that brings us to the next topic and to the next speaker. So thank you very much, Zeger,